Towards the end of the dry season, we drove from Cairns to Karumba on the edge of the Gulf of Carpentaria, a return trip of 1,600 kilometres along the Savannah Way. It was hot, extremely hot, but dams and beaches and some special birds were on the horizon. Our first stop was at Georgetown near Cumberland Dam, an old mine site reputed to be a good spot for finches. The motel had a dam where kitchen scraps were dumped. Water and food made it doubly attractive to wildlife. Agile wallabies, reptiles, ravens and raptors were always around. The resident monitor gorged itself until it could hardly plod away with its belly swaying. Monitor gone, now it's my turn. One of the largest of flying birds, Australian Bustard, frequents these savanna grasslands. There were plenty of insects too for the dazzling bee-eaters to swoop on. Our first finch was the cute owl-faced double-barred finch. Bad news. The council had decided to dredge the dam for a clean-out, but ever hopeful, we still headed out there next morning, guided by the old mine chimney past the empty dam. And behind the dam, eureka! Emptying the dam had created a shallow pool, and in that parched environment it was a lifesaver for birds, which were flocking around the edge of this precious resource. In fact, the shallow sides made it even more attractive for small birds like finches. Hopping around the periphery, drinking and bathing, was a large mixed flock of masked and black-throated finches, interspersed with peaceful doves and various honeyeaters. After the visions conjured up by the words, "The dam has been emptied," this was a very welcome sight. With its delicate pastel colouring offset by the striking black throat, the black-throated finch is one of my favourites in this charming bird family. Although the range of these two species overlaps, the black-throated is restricted to Queensland, while the masked occurs farther west through the Northern Territory into northwestern Australia. The nominate race here has pale brown cheeks, but farther west in the Northern Territory it gives way to the darker-cheeked race. There are also two races of the very widespread double-barred finch, with the white-rumped race here distributed down the east coast, while it transitions into the black-rumped race in the Northern Territory. Honeyeaters were constantly zipping in and out. And an olive-backed oriole, the more widespread of the two oriole species. Both are beautiful singers, but this bird wanted only to drink. This is about the most northeasterly occurrence of the squatter pigeon, which is distributed down the east of Queensland on bare tussock grass areas. The ever-alert and vigilant birder. Australia has 8 varied and beautiful parrots in the Rosella family, and covering almost the same range as squatter pigeon, pale-headed Rosella occurs mainly in Queensland in a variety of habitats. Great Bowerbird is the largest of the bowerbirds and occurs right across the top end of Australia. The top end equivalent of restless flycatcher, the paperback flycatcher, is smaller and glossier. We walked across to the parchment dry surrounding area dotted with termite mounds and with one small pool. White-winged triller is distributed all over Australia, but we usually only see it as a summer migrant in the south. Standing beside the pool was a pair of majestic black-necked storks, moving about as quickly as we were. The female is distinguished by her yellow iris. And in the trees a pair of blue-winged kookaburras, the kookaburra of the tropics, smaller than the better-known laughing kookaburra. Another kingfisher, sacred kingfisher, the most widespread of Australia's kingfishers. Driving back to Georgetown, passing Bustards at the side of the road. In the town, and another of our glorious Australian parrots, red-winged parrot, found in a wide range of habitats across northern Australia with access to water, and more pale-headed rosellas. Back to the motel. Birding in this arid environment is mainly about moving between water sources, and the motel surrounds don't disappoint. Many of the usual suspects we saw around the dam. Plus a grey-crowned babbler, busy as usual, but atypically without its mates. Large, noisy and pugnacious blue-faced honeyeater is widespread around the north and east of Australia. It takes nestlings and eggs, as well as nectar and insects. Brown honeyeater, nondescript, but one of the most widespread of the huge honeyeater family. This rare water is an ideal hunting ground for raptors, and we saw this collared sparrowhawk each morning and evening of our stay, as the desperately thirsty birds/prey came in to drink. When the sprinklers came on in the evening, the rosellas were in heaven, feeding on seeds in the cool grass, while we were in heaven being able to observe them so closely. Those exquisite blues. Next morning, we were back on the Savannah Way, heading west for Karumba. First stop was a large reservoir at Croydon. Water means birds. Smallest of friarbirds, little friarbird, lacks the horn on the beak of other friarbirds. Enjoying the shade of the trees, noisy and numerous red-tailed black cockatoos. Of course, there was a resident collared sparrowhawk, and no matter how close we came, it wasn't about to exert itself in the deadening heat. On to Normanton, and Christa Savannah King, a replica of the giant 8.6 metre croc shot here in 1956. Of more interest to us was the nearest water, the town dam, a good place for waders. Then we were driving on through the extensive Mutton Hole wetlands, which provide a welcome sanctuary for a variety of water birds. Our first Brolgas of the trip. Back on the road, but we always stopped to explore around any water. Great views of a male blue-winged kookaburra showing his blue tail. Exploring the causeway below the road, and wow! We hadn't noticed these birds until we were in close proximity. Perched at eye level was a pair of extremely hot and thirsty Pacific Bazas, giving us stunning views of these very attractive, colourful, medium-sized hawks with their distinctive crests and barred bellies. These are raptors we usually only see soaring above us. We were able to stand and watch while their focus was definitely on the water below. And our presence certainly wasn't going to deter them from enjoying it. We could hardly drag ourselves away from this unusual spectacle, but there was still a long way to go over the seemingly unending plains to Karumba and the ocean. Out on the plains, the Brolgas weren't dancing. That's for the lush breeding season, but they were flocking around the very sparse pools of water. We spotted an occasional Sarus Crane, distinguished from a Brolga by the red facial skin extending halfway down its neck. We were very, very glad to reach the ocean and the aptly named End of the Road Motel. It was refreshing to walk on the beach among the mangroves. Then checking out the locals. Before eating dinner at the Sunset Tavern while watching the tropical sunset. Next morning, we were in the mangroves very early, finding 2 mangrove specialists, yellow white-eye and mangrove gerygony. There were a couple of other passerines, white-bellied cuckoo shrike and black-faced wood swallow, while Whistling Kite was watching the action from a high vantage point. Back on the main street, the wires held oriental Dollarbird and a male Australasian Figbird. Busy feeding in the palms was a great Bowerbird, but no matter how we searched during our stay, we couldn't locate its bower. We drove to the golf course where we thought there may be water, and sure enough, the Brolgas were coming in. We never tire of watching these elegant birds flying into land. And this was the attraction. We enjoyed great views of 2 Sarus Cranes drinking among the Brolgas, distinguished by the red skin on their face extending farther down the neck, no dewlap, and pink rather than grey legs. When the sprinklers were turned on, the smaller birds came flocking in. Among them, pretty little rufous-throated honeyeaters, which are distributed right across the north of Australia. And the bright yellow of white-throated gerygone, which migrates as far as Victoria in the southern summer. The cranes were getting restless, and it was time for them to head off. And for us to enjoy another spectacular sunset as we ate dinner. High tide was early next morning, so we drove to the mangroves to look for waders, only stopping to admire a channel-billed cuckoo, a huge cuckoo with a massive bill, the world's largest brood parasite. The water birds were flying in with flocks of migratory waders swirling about, eager to stake a claim on the rich pickings in the mudflats to start their frantic feeding. Tides up here recede quickly, so the flocks soon settled, desperate to gorge as much as they could while conditions were ideal. These are mainly black-tailed godwits with long straight bills and darker backs than this bar-tailed godwit. It was a busy scene up above as well. The smaller birds are great knots, which like to feed with godwits, each species using their different sized bills to utilise a slightly different layer of mud. The birds spread out as the tide receded. The bird walking to the right is a common greenshank. The snipe-like head pattern and thick bill with a drooping tip indicates a broad-billed sandpiper, a very active, lively bird. On the left, with down-curved bill and black legs, is curlew sandpiper, while the bright orange legs and pronounced upturned bill easily identify a pteric sandpiper, perhaps the most frenetic feeder of all, as it dashes about. Seeing the Pacific golden plover with a remnant of breeding plumage reminded us of seeing its close cousin, the European plover, in full breeding plumage during summer in Norway. The weather was a little different, and so were the birds' behaviours. No quiet observation permitted as in Australia when they're so intent on feeding. They were very aware of our presence and didn't want us anywhere near their nests. Plovers stood on a high point and piped their disapproval. Whimbrels flew up and down, calling as a distraction. Even the smaller common sandpiper had plenty to say to discourage us. Back in the intense heat of an Australian summer, the birds were spread out in front of us, the big and the small. Two sand plovers which are difficult to tell apart in non-breeding plumage, greater sand plover and Siberian sand plover, which is very similar but with a shorter bill. The tide is out and the feeding frenzy is over. Next morning we left Karumba after checking the beach in front of our motel, where gulls and terns were feeding. Heading back southeast over the plains, as usual we stopped at any spots with water. We heard finches, zebra finch, the most widespread of Australian finches. Australian Pratincole, an elegant long-winged bird of the dry, hot inland plains where they breed. They do require water, but we've often seen them in the outback, even on Gibber Plains. Quite an enigma. A sturdy little Horsfield's bush lark, a widespread bird inhabiting a variety of native grasslands. At this rest area, walking out of the shade into the heat was like walking across Death Valley, but river means water and water means birds, and it delivered. There was blossom, and a small flock of noisy blossom nomads, varied lorikeets. Back to Georgetown and our motel. Hard to miss the loud call of this male Koel, a summer migrant from Indonesia, probably passing through to more southerly parts of Australia, where it can be less than welcome, as it keeps up this incessant calling all day and into the night to attract a mate. Red-winged parrots had also come in to feed on the seeding trees. These are juveniles. In 2 years, they will molt into their spectacular adult plumage. Grey butcherbird was our last bird as we hit the woodlands, and its melodious song welcomed us to the greener, higher country. We spent the night in Gelatin on the Atherton tablelands to try for another favourite finch, so it was straight up Mount Lewis early next morning. A quirky-looking top-knot pigeon flew in, with its distinctive bulging head shape composed of swept-back grey head feathers extending into a ginger crest flopping down its neck, nicely matched with bulging red eyes and red bill. But feeding on the grass seeds in front of us and giving wonderful views was the bird we had come to see, blue-faced parrot finch. A rare, shy and elusive species, it flies into the nearest cover at any disturbance. Its distribution is very localised. This grassy clearing in a mountain rainforest is ideal habitat. As an altitudinal migrant, it was still here in October at the start of the wet season, but moves to lower areas of the tablelands in the dry. A delightful bird. Then winding down the mountain to Cairns and straight to the esplanade for more waders. This is one of the best spots in Australia to easily get close-up views of the various migratory species that feed here during the summer, and to meet up with other birders. And when you turn around, the tree-lined esplanade path hosts other interesting birds, often nesting. Or going through the preliminaries. And of course, in any unlikely spot there is liable to be a bush stone curlew or two, staying obligingly stationary. Looking up from this nest, we saw the Queenslandica race of Rufous Owl. In Darwin, we had seen the slightly larger Rufa race, an adult with its fledgling. Before flying home, we couldn't resist a quick look around Katana wetlands, to round off with a few old favourites featured on our previous films. Not as thirsty as the olive-backed, the yellow oriole obliged with a song. A trip with an interesting spectrum of habitats and species, and did I mention? It was very, very hot.